Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Janine Vanderberg with Changing the Narrative, and we're a campaign based in Colorado to change the way that people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism. Thrilled to be with you here today at the Noted Expo, where we're going to chat about one of my favorite things, anti-ageist birthday cards, and why they can be a powerful tool in changing the narrative, or that is the story that we tell ourselves and others about getting older, about aging. So I'd like to start by doing this. I'm going to invite you to look at the next slide and imagine you've got a birthday coming up, or maybe you've just had a birthday. And I want you to reflect on how you think about that upcoming or just past birthday. Item number one, are you sad about it, angry about it? You hate the thought of getting older. Icon number two, maybe you're just neutral. You're like, I don't care one way or another. Or number three, you're feeling, woohoo, I can't wait. I have a birthday coming up and I'm excited about what the next year will bring. So just take a moment right now and jot down whether your state of mind about an upcoming or just past birthday is 1, 2, or 3. So imagine for a moment, if you will, that there was some sort of berry or some sort of food that we could eat, some exercise that we could do that would help us live longer, have better physical and mental health, improved memory, and even reduce the likelihood that we might develop dementia someday. We'd be all over it, right? We think that would be great. Well, here's the reality, and this is great news for any of you who noted item number 3. We know through research by the Yale School of Public Health, a woman named Dr. Becca Levy and her colleagues, that having age-positive attitudes, feeling positive about getting older, yields all of those benefits. Longer life, on average 7.5 years, better physical and mental health, and that reduced likelihood of dementia. So those are great things, right? If we're feeling age positive, and we should be all in, right? But what gets in the way of really getting those benefits? Well, it's kind of what we're surrounded in by our society, and what that is ageism. So what is ageism? Ageism is prejudice, it's stereotyping, it's discrimination based on age. It can be directed against younger people as well as older people. So for example, if a boss looks at you and says, you know, you work really hard, but I don't think you have enough experience yet for this position, despite your qualifications, that is ageism, and it's ageism directed against you as a younger person. If that same boss is looking at you as an older person and saying, you know, I'd love to give you an opportunity to learn this new software, but I don't think you're going to stick around that long because you're older. Well, that's another example of ageism. Both of them are based on stereotypes of what it's like to be younger or older, and often it leads to outright discrimination. Either way, whether directed at younger or older people, is unjust, and it means that we lose out on opportunities, as do our communities, workplaces, and society. So ageism actually shows up in a lot of places, but we're going to talk for a moment about how it shows up in the workplace, because for most of us, that's a fairly common experience of going to work. So here's what the data shows, and it shows that ageism is pretty rampant. On the left-hand side, you see that statistic, 56%. This was a study that was done of the Urban Institute of Americans over a long span of years, and found that 56% of Americans entering their 50s with stable employment, stable jobs, either were pushed out or laid off, and only 10% of them ever recouped financially. And that's something that I hear about every day at Changing the Narrative. As I go around and I talk to people about ageism, I hear people say, you know, that ageism thing you're talking about happened to me, happened to my partner, happened to my dad. We know that ageism in the workplace is rampant and has really negative consequences. Things like people not being able to afford their mortgage, people like not being able to, and a father was talking to me about this, about having to tell his son that he wasn't going to be able to help out with college tuition anymore. Ageism is real, and we know it's fairly rampant. This middle statistic from an AARP survey found that 61% of people age 45 and older had either witnessed or experienced discrimination based on age in their workplaces. So again, both studies, over half of older people seeing workplace age discrimination. There aren't as many studies about discrimination directed against younger people, but a study that was released last summer showed that 49%, so almost half of younger people, felt that they had experienced workplace age discrimination, stereotyping, either from a colleague or sometimes a supervisor. So again, across the lifespan, we know that ageism, that stereotyping, discrimination, prejudice based on age is pretty rampant, and that it has negative consequences for us. So it's really hard to maintain that age positive attitude that we're supposed to have about getting older when we're surrounded by ageism. We know that ageism really has its roots in implicit bias. And implicit bias means it's bias that we kind of all have because we've been surrounded by negative messages about getting older from the time that we're children. And that's what research shows. Kids as young as 3 and 4 years old start developing those ageist attitudes, right? Of thinking us versus them. There are us, and then there are those older people. And the good news is that actually, if we are aware of implicit bias, we tend to try to check it in ourselves, and we can therefore act in ways that are less biased against people as they're getting older. But I want you for a moment to just stop and think. Again, take your pen, maybe jot down a few words. When you think about getting older, what words and messages come to mind for you? So just take a moment and jot those words down. And now what I want you to do is look at this selection of birthday cards that I purchased this summer at a retail store and see were any of the words that you jotted down reflected in these cards. Cranky or more difficult, everything hurts, right? It's all decline, deterioration. Grumpy old man, here you killing it. So it's important for all of us to think about what are the messages that we're sending in our birthday cards that both reflect the cultural narrative that is out there, but also reinforce it. Because every time someone purchases a card, sees a card on a rack, sends a card, we're reinforcing those negative stereotypes that instead of aging being a normal and positive thing, aging is also actually all decline. It's the idea that we are over the hill, that as we get older, we no longer have value, or using a hill analogy, as the next card shows us both literally and metaphorically, that literally getting older is a process of all being downhill. Of all the cards and all the ageist birthday cards that I've seen in doing this campaign, this is probably the one that I hate the most. This whole idea of that as you get older and a woman, and everything is downhill, and somehow that someone thinks is humorous is a great example of implicit bias. And I think it's important for all of us, whether we're in the anti-ageism business as I am, or you're coming to this conference as a wholesale buyer, you're coming here as a designer, to be aware of the implicit bias that we all may have that may lead us to think that this sort of depiction that reinforces negative stereotypes about age in a way that we wouldn't create cards that would reinforce negative stereotypes about race or gender, for example, but how this reinforces negative stereotypes that have those adverse consequences. And the good news is we can actually do something about the message. So the interesting thing to me also with birthday cards is how early those ageist attitudes and that implicit bias starts to express themselves. So a few months ago, I was shopping for birthday cards for my youngest daughter, who is turning 30, and she's got a great job, and she's worked really hard and just received her MBA. She's got a caring family. She's got great friends, right? Life is good. But what's the message that she's getting as she turns 30? Well, these cards kind of show us that, again, it's all downhill from here. So I think we just need to stop and examine in what way do we actually, as we are creating these cards, are we reinforcing the negative stereotypes that are out there about getting older, and make it harder for any of us to develop those kind of age positive attitudes that we need. So changing the narrative is about changing people's thinking and actions and the way they talk about aging, about getting older, and about ageism. And one of our sayings is we can't just talk about it. It's not going to be really helpful if I just run around talking about ageism. We got to be about it, right? And so to that end, a lot of our work is directed at attempts to try to end ageism. So we do workshops on ageism. We teach people how to reframe aging. We do social media campaigns. 2 years ago, we did a photo contest campaign to move away from the negative photos about older people that are either the pharmaceutical ad version or the poor lonely woman looking out of her window. And instead, what we did is we did a contest to solicit photos about people getting older that are doing real things that older people do, like starting businesses and working and intergenerational tutoring and mentoring and volunteering in community, all the things that we do across the lifespan, right? So the opportunity actually presented itself during our pandemic year. We had a lot of savings in travel money because we moved most of our workshops virtually. And we decided to invest that money in local artists. We had been talking for a few years about this idea of doing something around birthday cards. And what came to us is let's contract with local artists who we know are, taking a hit financially during this year. And let's have them create their idea of what a pro-aging business card or birthday card would be, if you will. So here's what we did. We put out in September, we put out basically a call for artists. And because our initiative, even though we do work across the country, is based in Colorado, we decided to limit our call to artists to Colorado artists. So we put a call out there and we reached out through all of our networks, through design schools, businesses, etc. And we basically said we were looking for artists who are willing to design anti-ageist birthday cards. So of course we had to kind of explain what anti-ageist birthday cards are, because the good news is, and if you didn't know much about ageism before this presentation, most people don't know much about ageism, which is why we do presentations like this. Our charge to our artists was pretty simple. We simply said, we want cards that celebrate and don't denigrate getting older. We didn't do a formal scope of work and a lot of specifications. We put the call out there. The application process was pretty simple. We asked artists to watch a 10-minute video that we produced about the messages that we did not want to see in birthday cards. So all the messages that reinforce negative stereotypes and the words that we didn't want them to use. And you see some of these words on the slide. And because these words are shown to kind of reinforce, again, those negative stereotypes. And instead, we gave them some of the messages. So some of the messages are that we know that aging is a normal process, that aging is a time of contribution and growth, that we kind of all learn more as we get older, and that can be useful to our communities if we don't allow ageism to get in the way, and that we should celebrate getting older. So basically our process was we want you, and we're going to contract with you. We're going to pay you to design cards around this. And we asked artists to apply through a Google form, which basically asked for some information about the artist, some indication, what was their experience with ageism, if in fact they had had any. How did they think? How do they believe that art can actually change the cultural narrative, the story that we tell ourselves about getting older? And we asked them to just give us, show us a few samples of the kind of art and the kind of cards that you produce. So that was it. We had over 60 artists applied, and honestly, we were kind of stunned. And we ended up selecting 22. And honestly, if we had had the budget, we would have probably contracted with most of the 60 plus artists, because we were really inspired by the fact that so many people wanted to participate in this campaign. The 22 Colorado artists ended up being from all over Colorado. So Colorado, from urban, rural, frontier, the really isolated areas in Colorado. In age, our artists range from age 16 was our youngest artist to age 82, represented by people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ. So we had a really diverse representation of artists. And I think what happened as a result is we had a very diverse set of ideas about what it would mean to celebrate aging instead of denigrating aging. And we're going to share with you just a few. You can see others of our card designs in our virtual booth, but I'll share a few that we selected and why they stood out to us as being able to tell a different story. And each of them tells a different story in a different way. We were not seeking to develop a collection. We were seeking to basically provide examples of what a pro and age positive birthday card could look like. A panel of judges actually picked our artists. So this is important to know. And what we tried to do in picking our artists was actually having an artist, having an expert in reframing aging. On the panel was a small business owner who sells like gifts for good, including greeting cards. So it has a really social justice bent. We had the director of a nonprofit art gallery that works with youth with disabilities. So in the same way that our artists were diverse, so were the panel of judges who selected the artists who participated in the campaign. So I'm now going to run through a few of the designs and explain why, in our view, they help to change the narrative about aging away from the negative stereotypes and towards a more positive view. So first, people sometimes say things, and again, this is implicit bias at work, or we just don't know better. People will say things like, oh, you're this age, you look great for your age. That's actually not a compliment. And the reason it's not a compliment is it suggests that at a certain age, you're just supposed to look like what, really bad? And what this artist did, and we thought was a very clever way, was basically kind of flip that compliment on its head and just say, you look great, crossing out for your age. You look great all the time, which is actually a great way. If you're talking to someone who's older and you think they're looking good that day, just say, you look great, you look good, not you look good for your age. Our second artist took this notion that getting older is about being over the hill, and we think took it in a really interesting direction. Young Black woman. There's a theme here, I think, of also surviving the pandemic, and we'll see this in a couple of our cards. But basically, instead of that, oh, you're over the hill at a certain age narrative, instead took a you're at the top of the hill approach. You can see here, she says, every year is a victory, happy birthday. We've got someone kind of celebrating at the top of this hill, right? And inside the card says, congrats, another year conquered, happy birthday. So again, taking that idea that it's all downhill, as you get older, and instead saying, here you are, you're at your peak, you've conquered another year, you've learned new things. So we really like this. We also like the vibrancy of color, and I actually like the vibrancy of color so much that ended up engaging this particular artist to create our new vibrant logo for changing the narrative, because I loved her sense of color. So what we loved about this artist, and this is actually our most popular card, our best-selling card, and the one that people keep sharing on social media, etc. So after what I think we can all acknowledge was a dismal year for so many, and where the OK Boomer theme kind of morphed into Boomer Remover with COVID and whatever, here was someone who's saying, you know what? I am a boomer and I'm celebrating about it. And by the way, I'm celebrating my birthday. And so created this very, clever card. And I think we all have felt this way, certainly coming out of the pandemic. We just want to put that party hat on and and toast and have a glass of champagne. So she woke up, put on her birthday hat and said, this calls for some champagne and shenanigans. And the inside of the card says, count me in, girlfriend. And I think that's a feeling that all of us has had, but this feeling of, we're going to celebrate our age and we're not going to allow others to define us either with terms like OK Boomer or any of the other horrific terms that are sometimes applied to older people. No, we're going to celebrate and we're going to acknowledge that getting older is a great thing. And then this artist deliberately took on the It's All Downhill theme. Now, this is one of my favorites. And actually, I gave this card to my husband when he celebrated his birthday 2 months ago. Instead of it's all downhill, it's like, no, we're looking upward. We're looking toward the future. We are looking at new adventures. So the theme of this card is really, and you can see, with the telescope looking outward, we are looking outward, we are looking upward towards new adventures in our life as we get older. And for me, this was very personal because my husband and I were kind of taking on this kind of encore career, and we're doing some new things in our lives, and we're starting on our next adventure. And so I think this really appeals to people who are, maybe stepping away from something they've always done and looking forward to a new experience, something new, to be able to say, no, aging is not downhill. Aging is a time where we're going to look at what's next. And sometimes in the field, it's called second stage, third phase, whatever it is. But this really appeals to that particular demographic and new adventures. And then finally, I wanted to share this one because we actually received a number of cards that reflected, I think, sentiments that are prevalent in other cultures about getting older. So this particular card was developed by an artist named Arlette Lucera, who is also the director in Colorado of the Chicano Humanities and Arts Council. And it kind of reflected this idea that actually getting older is a time of, kind of being able to share wisdom and experience. And we love the sentiment that it says, if experience is the currency of living life. So already we're talking about money. If experience is the currency of living life, then wisdom is wealth. And here's to continued wellness and abundance. Happy birthday. And what is interesting to me, of all the social media that I've shared this on, I've shared this particular one on LinkedIn with some sort of, caption. Wouldn't it be great if all employers looked at wisdom as a currency of living life, and wisdom is wealth? And that tends to get shared a lot. So I think it's kind of, but to me, this also calls attention to the fact that by deliberately trying to seek the perspective of diverse artists, we got diverse perspectives on how people view getting older and what the benefits are of getting older. And we were able to kind of reflect this throughout the different themes in the birthday cards that you can find actually in our booth. So why are we here? Why you and why now? Well, I think this is another one of my favorite sayings. Today, for each one of us, right, is the oldest we've ever been. And I want you to think about this before you go to sleep tonight. It's actually the youngest we'll ever be. We're all headed in the same direction. If we are fortunate, tomorrow we will wake up a day older, right? Birthdays are a unique way that we kind of mark this passage of time, right? And what all of you do, whether you create it, you buy it, you wholesale it, you sell it in your shops, all of you are purveyors of these very tangible markers and milestones of this truth that we are all getting older. So that's why you, and so that's why when we think of what was the best way to talk about ageism, and using birthday cards to talk about ageism for us at Changing the Narrative has been a really accessible way, where there were some audiences who are going, ageism, I don't want to hear about that, no. But if we talk about birthday cards and we talk about how it reflects ageism in our culture and in our attitudes, people are a lot more opening and accepting. And we actually get a lot of media coverage around this because people like to talk about birthday cards. You know this, you design birthday cards, you sell birthday cards. Birthday cards are a popular item, and it's given us a very accessible way. So that's why it was important for us. And we also recognize that you are in the position to make a difference. Why is now the right time to do it? There's kind of a convergence of a number of things that are going on right now. First, and in part because of the pandemic, but it had already started to grow, the pandemic really exposed ageism around the world. When elected officials were calling for older people to sacrifice themselves for younger people in the economy, that got a lot of people a little bit woke to the idea that ageism exists. A lot of policy decisions were made that increased social isolation, et cetera. So people have really started, as we come out of the pandemic, mobilizing and saying we need to use our voices to end ageism, because now we're seeing it and we're seeing how it affects us. At the same time, we announced, and this was this fall, at the same time we announced our Celebrate Age campaign, and we're soliciting artists, and this kind of spread through social media on the internet. The Center for the Policy on Aging in London reached out to us and they said, we're working on a birthday card thing, and you see in the lower left-hand corner, they basically contracted with someone in London. They call it a doodler, but to create these a very limited collection of birthday cards, but again, around the idea that aging is good. So you see here the title, Shy, as researchers discover that aging is good. Then we start meeting, right? And so we're meeting with the people in London, and then people from the European Union come through. We discover that in Finland, there's an artist also doing an anti-ageist birthday card campaign. You see her card in the upper right, aging fiercely since my birth, as is everyone really. So the cards kind of vary from inspirational to clever to, fierce, as in this case. And then the other reason that the time is now is that there is now a global coalition that has formed. They released a report on March 18th calling in United Nations, World Health Organization, and others, calling for a global campaign launched this year to end ageism. And if you look at item number 3 on their 3 recommendations for action, what they're asking for is building a movement to change the narrative about age and aging. That's what we're trying to do. And literally every meeting that we have in the US and internationally, there are more and more people. And this is also a grassroots. So it's not just leaders of organizations who are coming together. As we get older and people in their 40s and 50s are realizing they're being pushed out, women in their 40s and 50s are saying, you know what? I'm looking for a birthday card. I don't want to send that anti-ageist birthday card to my friend. I don't think that's funny. There's a growing movement, and they are joining this movement to end ageism. So I think that time. There's also an enormous business opportunity because the world is aging. So AARP did some research that showed the total of the gross domestic product of the United States represented by the population that is age 50 and over, $8.3 trillion. And that places the US population age 50 and over, as you can see in this chart, third largest economy behind the US overall, and then China. It's a huge economy. It's called the longevity economy in our field. And people have money and they want to spend it. And what they don't want to do is spend it on cards that make fun of them and that reinforce negative stereotypes that they know show up then at work and in other places and are damaging. So there's this current and growing business opportunity that I think is a huge business opportunity for card makers. So the opportunity really for all of you is to be at this leading edge of advancing this age positive culture, the culture that can result in all of us living longer, living healthier, having better memory, reducing our likelihood of dementia, and basically just, having a better overall life while tapping into new markets. The more people learn about ageism, the more they reject ageist birthday cards. 2 years ago, a friend of mine who really has been the impetus for part of this anti-ageist birthday card, she's one of our volunteers. We call our volunteers change agents with age capitalized. And she wrote a blog about how for the first time since she had become a change agent for changing the narrative, and she had been talking to her friends about ageism, she had been doing group presentations on ageism, she passed a milestone birthday, and for the first time she received not one ageist birthday cards. Her friends went out of the way to find, and they had to go out of their way to find cards that actually celebrated aging. I do workshops, as I mentioned, across the country on ageism. And everywhere I go, people complain about ageist birthday cards. A woman in Maine told me that she walked out of an independent store that carried beautiful gifts where she was going to shop for a card for birthday for a friend, but she walked out of the store because it had ageist birthday cards. So not only did she not buy the card, but she also then did not spend money with the store buying the gifts. She walked out because of ageist birthday cards, thinking, why would we spend our dollars in a place that thinks it's okay to mock as we're getting older? We've heard from people all over the country as we're starting to share the news about this anti-ageist birthday cards, how excited they are to buy and send our cards. Do we want people to buy and send our cards? Sure. But what we really want them to do is buy and send your cards. We want them to see inspired designs. We want them to see clever designs. We want them to see inspirational designs, beautiful designs that celebrate the universal fact that we all face. We're all getting older. Getting older isn't bad, ageism is. The greeting card industry, and I hope all of you have a huge opportunity, and I'll hope you'll join us in trying to change the narrative, telling a different story about getting older. Here's how you can connect with us. You can certainly come and find us at our booth. We're in aisle 3 with Changing the Narrative, and I'll leave this up for a few minutes. You can connect with us via email, on our website, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'd love to chat with you about how you can be part of a different narrative. Thanks so much.